U.S. intelligence agency mind control.
God bless America. Thank you.
Hey. Oh, that was an event.
No more attacks.
Good evening. The state of Missouri this evening executed death row inmate Marcellus Williams as scheduled by lethal injection. A jury convicted the 55-year-old St. Louis man in the 1998 killing of Felicia Gale, who was stabbed repeatedly during a burglary of her home in a St. Louis suburb. Williams had long maintained his innocence. His attorneys filed multiple appeals, raising questions over jury selection at his trial and the handling of evidence in the case. Governor Mike Parson said no judge nor juror ever had found Williams innocent.
At 6:01 p.m., the order was given to proceed with the lawful execution. At 6:01 p.m., the lethal injection of pentobarbital was administered. At 6:03 p.m., the 5-minute timer was set. At 6:10 p.m., Marcellus Williams was pronounced dead.
Both the family of the murder victim and the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office had asked for the death sentence to be commuted to life in prison. Parson yesterday denied clemency, and the Missouri Supreme Court declined to grant him a stay of execution. The U.S. Supreme Court today also rejected the appeal.
Missouri has
On
executed
what
a convicted
grounds?
killer despite a...
On what grounds did they reject the appeal? Do we have that?
No, I didn't.
Mm. I know a post on Twitter says somebody 6-3. Wow.
objections from the victim's family and the prosecutor. 55-year-old Marcellus Williams had been on death row for the
He
1998
was
stab
black.
death
Yep,
of a woman during
that
a
was
burglary.
right. That was the reason.
DNA testing done on the murder weapon did not match Williams. The victim's family and prosecutors called for vacating the conviction, arguing that no physical evidence tied him to the crime. But the state Supreme Court just rejected that appeal. The court pointed to the victim's purse and laptop being found in Williams' vehicle and to an alleged confession in prison for keeping that execution order in place.
That sounds like horseshit.
Time now 12:14 this afternoon. Marcellus Williams, the Missouri death row inmate convicted in the 1998 deadly stabbing of a woman, is dead. He was executed last night by lethal injection at a state prison in Missouri. There was a last-minute attempt to get a stay from a Supreme Court, but they declined. Williams was convicted in the murder of former newspaper reporter and social worker Felicia Gale back in 2001.
So it wasn't even the Supreme Court said, yeah, go for it. It was the Supreme Court said, no, we're not even going to bother hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
I guess.
Recently, his case came into the spotlight after it was believed there was racial bias from prosecutors in the original trial. Williams had long maintained his innocence in the case. Both the prosecutor's office and the victim's family opposed the execution. This year, prosecutors attempted to vacate that conviction.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Unless the U.S. Supreme Court intervenes, the state of Missouri will kill Marcellus Williams at 6 p.m. Central Time today. On Monday, Republican Governor Mike Parson turned down Williams' bid for clemency, followed a short time later by the Missouri Supreme Court rejecting his latest legal challenge. Williams is African-American. He was convicted in 2001 of killing a former St. Louis post.
So I think they said that in the coverage just before.
Dispatch reporter Felicia Gale, who's white, during a robbery. He was convicted by 11 white jurors and 1 black juror after the prosecution was allowed to preemptively strike out 6 other prospective black jurors. Williams always maintained his innocence. The jurors, the prosecutor, and the murder victim's family all oppose Williams' execution. For more, we're joined in Kansas City, Missouri, by Tricia Rojo Bushnell, Marcellus Williams' attorney, executive director of the Midwest Innocence Project. Welcome to Democracy Now! We only have a few minutes, but it's possible that Marcellus Williams only has a few hours. Can you explain what you are calling for and what this case at the last minute is all about?
Yes, at this time, we're asking for what Marcellus Williams has been asking for 23 years, which is for a court to take a full and accurate review of the proceedings before it. Right now, for the first time ever, a few weeks ago, the prosecutor had to take the stand and testify under oath about his strikes that he used during the jury selection process. And at that hearing, he testified that he, at least in part, struck a juror based on his race. Yet right now, we have yet to have a court who will fully examine and review that evidence. We know that that's a violation of the Constitution. The prosecutor agrees that violated Williams' constitutional rights. But what we see is a system that's looking at finality over fairness, rushing to get to an execution date instead of taking the time to stop this execution and look at the merits of what is being argued.
Law and order.
And what was the main evidence against him? And could you talk about the advanced DNA testing or what it's revealed about the murder weapon?
Yes. So Mr. Williams was convicted based on what we know is a leading cause of wrongful conviction, which is essentially informant testimony. So this is a murder where there were no leads for months and months. And then at some point, the police suggested to the victim's husband that he should offer a reward. And it was only then, after a $10,000 reward had been offered, that the first informant came forward, a jailhouse informant, who said also that he wouldn't testify until he got the money. The information he provided was information that was essentially out in the public sphere, in the newspaper, but he also provided information about another informant, a woman named Laura Asaro, who had had connections to Marcellus Williams in the past. She also not only had incentivized by the reward money, but the police forced her to talk by picking her up on her own warrants and saying, you know, we can arrest you and charge you with these crimes unless you help us here.
Coercion.
At the time of the crime, there was a number of pieces of forensic evidence, including bloody footprints and hairs found at the crime scene, all of which exclude Marcellus Williams. In 2015, however, Mr. Williams requested additional DNA testing of the murder weapon, which was a knife found still protruding from the victim's body. That DNA testing was performed. Male DNA was found on that murder weapon, and it excludes Marcellus Williams. He is not the person who left that DNA on the knife. Based on all of that evidence, the prosecutor reviewed the case, brought forward this motion to overturn Mr. Williams' conviction on the basis of innocence, as well as on the basis of these constitutional violations, including racial discrimination.
Remember
but on the day before the evidentiary hearing,
we talk about
DNA test.
What if one person who's innocent gets the death penalty?
Mm-hmm.
And that's enough to make it, no matter like what your position is on it, that's enough that you should consider
be against it.
Outline it, just because what if the one person is innocent?
Mm-hmm. At a very minimum, yeah.
Testing came in that showed that the DNA on that knife could be consistent with the prosecutors.
Yeah,
the
killer killed two
DNA.
people. That's correct.
What do you mean?
Because the killer killed him too.
True.
And the trial prosecutor's investigator. At the evidentiary hearing, we've now learned that they mishandled that knife. They touched it without gloves in 2001 repeatedly, essentially destroying any potential probative value this critical evidence would have, which is what the prosecutor now also concedes was a constitutional violation.
So, Tricia, who is in charge at the U.S. Supreme Court of this case? What has to happen today?
So the stay motions go to Justice Kavanaugh, but the courts are going to be reviewing all of the cert petitions, the requests that the Supreme Court take on the case, as well as the motions to stop the execution. There are 3 petitions pending before the U.S. Supreme Court right now. The first is regarding the governor, Parson, had dissolved what was called a board of inquiry that was created to review all of this evidence. He dissolved it, even though Governor Eric Greitens had appointed it. So the first is regards to whether or not he was able to do that. The second is whether the federal courts should have reopened the case to allow this new evidence of racial discrimination in the jury selection to be heard. And the last one, filed last night, is about what weight should the prosecutor be given, his concessions be given. And we know that the U.S. Supreme Court has already granted review of a similar case, the case of Richard Glossip out of Oklahoma, where the Attorney General there said the same thing, that the constitutional error occurred here and we shouldn't execute him. And so for those same reasons, the court should hear this case
Tricia
as well.
Rojo Bushnell, Executive Director of the Midwest Innocence Project, the prosecutor, the jurors, and the victim's family have called for him not to be executed. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
All of
Democracy Now!
Crazy. Fucking hell.
Honestly, I think even if they found the actual killer, they would have still killed this guy.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Tonight, a Missouri man has been executed by the state,
CNN's coverage.
but a deeply unsettling question remains. Was Marcellus Williams innocent?
Most
He was accused
definitely.
of killing Felicia Gale in 1998, but a re-examination of evidence raised questions about whether he actually did it. After
Look,
years of investigations and hearings,
even if he did do it, okay? To get a conviction, it says beyond reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm. There's
That's-
doubt.
Yeah. More and it's more than reasonable, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
even if he 100% did this, the fact that any reasonable doubt exists should be enough to negate and take the case back up.
Not anymore. He's dead.
Well, they still should open the case again.
I agree, and like it's obviously it's not going to help him anymore because the state did what the state's going to fucking do, but yeah, it should be looked into.
Missouri Governor Mike Parsons stepped in this year and ordered the execution to move forward. Now, that was despite prosecutors, Williams's family, and even the family of Gale pleading to spare Williams's life. Now, that
Well, she
did
was a
not
journalist. What was she
Tonight-
currently working on? You know, could have been a targeted assassination.
True.
a last-ditch appeal to the Supreme Court was rejected with a 6-3 vote falling along ideological lines. A devout practicing Muslim, Williams' last words were, "All praise be to Allah in every situation." The man's last meal, chicken wings and tater tots. And at 7:01 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, Marcellus Williams was given the lethal injection of the sedative pentobarbital, and 9 minutes later, he was pronounced dead.
At one point, he appeared to wiggle his feet, which were underneath a white sheet that's pulled up to his neck, moved his head slightly. Then I could see his chest heaved about a half dozen times. I didn't see any movement after that.
The death penalty, ladies and gentlemen. Neither family spoke after the execution, but many people in the public did. Nearly 100 people protesting outside of the correctional facility even today. But the governor, through a spokesperson, well, they defended the execution.
No juror nor judge has ever found Williams' innocence claim to be credible. 2 decades of judicial proceedings and more than 15 judicial hearings upheld his guilty conviction. Thus, the order of execution has been carried out.
With me now, St. Louis prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell, who is also running for Congress. Wesley Bell,
Unfortunate hairline.
you and I have spoken in the past when there was a chance that they would stay the execution, a fancy way of saying to continue for time to investigate the possibility that he was in fact innocent. What is your reaction tonight knowing that that did not happen and he is now dead?
Justice, the interests of justice were not served. And as a prosecutor, as you know, as a former prosecutor, our job is not to get convictions, it's not to collect stats.
Go fuck yourself. Yes, it fucking is. Lawyers only take pro bono jobs to bolster their record, to pad their stats. Most lawyers won't take jobs that they won't win. And you're trying to tell me
did a bunch of pro bono cases
that prosecutors,
on principle.
prosecutors, people working for the state, their job is not getting convictions and padding your stats? Bullshit. If I was a prosecutor, I would want the most convictions on my record that I could get to show that I did my job. To say this, you are lying. You are lying. Jasmine Crockett was a defender, a public defender.
I know,
not
but
a
you said
prosecutor.
lawyers.
Yes, and like everything that I say, there are exceptions to the rules.
It's to bring justice. And
but the rule is lawyers are scum.
For us, for the folks that in my office,
this man's barber hates
TPM, Matthew Jacoby, Elena McMullen, Teresa Hurla, my office, the Conviction Incident Review Unit led by Jessica Hathaway. We're talking about folks who invested blood, sweat, and now tears to spare.
So what you're telling me, CNN, is you've brought the guy on responsible for making sure this guy died. That's who this guy is? Cool.
His life, because it was the right thing to do. If there's the shadow of a doubt with respect to innocence or the integrity of a conviction, at the very least, that individual.
Like this guy, his title is St. Louis County, Missouri prosecuting attorney. I can only assume that this is the guy that made sure he died.
Individual should not be executed. And it is, to say disappointing would be an understatement. There were several opportunities on the timeline, if you will. Obviously, this case predated me originally.
There you go. It wasn't
so
him.
this, 20 plus years ago, but throughout the appellate process, and now once we have had an opportunity, there have been opportunities for decisions to be made that should have.
He wasn't the prosecutor.
Yeah, he said it predated him.
Okay, so he was pushing to overturn it as the prosecutor. So who was? So he seems to be involved. Hold on, Midwest Innocence Project. 24. they need to update that. The court's ruling here. Attorney statement. There we go. This is what we want. Okay. All right. Attorney statement. Go away. Cool. I love having
He has
to
Dutch hair, but his real hair.
I love having to subscribe to Microsoft Word in order to read a Word document. That's fucking cool.
You can open them in Google.
No, I know. I just don't want to open them in Google. I just want it to work.
It's funny because my weather right now, it's like 75 degrees and cloudy. You wouldn't, tell just by looking at it that there's a hurricane about to hit me.
Statement by Grisha, the attorney for Marcellus Williams. Okay, that's all this was. So she said the statement was the decision of a prosecutor to move to vacate a murder conviction and death sentence is not done lightly. Prosecuting attorney Bell filed a motion. Bell? What's this guy's name? Wesley Bell? Prosecuting attorney Bell fled a motion because there is overwhelming vacate a murder conviction. Bell fled a motion because there is overwhelming evidence that trials was constitutionally unfair, including revelations that the state contaminated the most critical evidence in the case of the murder weapon. Yep, we will continue pursuing every option to prevent their wrongful execution. Okay, but I want to know who the fucking goddamn prosecutor who made sure this guy died. I want to know who this was. Because they said that they took the case to the courts, right? The Missouri Supreme Court. Do they have prosecutors? Yes?
No, I think it's just the Supreme Court.
Okay. So there must have been a lower court before the Supreme Court, which would have bumped it up. I'm telling you, there's somebody with a name who made sure this guy died. And we should all know that guy's name.
Have resulted in Mr. Williams' life being spared, and the system failed him. It failed all of us.
You have to wonder why there was such a vested interest in the speed of this. After this was a murder from decades ago at this point in time, now that this was underway, why do you think there was the haste to do so, given your office said no, the victims' families said no, he was not asking to be released, he wanted time to investigate further and was even willing to plead guilty to lesser charges, which I might add, there were people who said, well, hold on, that must mean that he's probably guilty. What's your response to that?
What he was willing to agree to was called an Alford plea, as you know, which he is not pleading guilty to the charges. He's acknowledging that there's enough evidence to convict him. But that was really for us to be able to buy time to be able to investigate his claims of innocence, because the execution date was set. If the execution date was stayed or just pushed back a few months to give us more time to investigate this matter, we may have been able to determine whether or not he was in fact innocent or not. But as you know, it's not just about innocence. It's also about the integrity of the conviction.
Right.
And there are serious, legitimate concerns about this conviction. And at the very least, he shouldn't be executed. That's what we're asking. This was not a dichotomy between execution or release. This was execution or life in prison without the possibility of parole. And then his team and him, and they would have time to vet his claims of innocence. But now we're looking at a family who had to relive this again. The Felicia Gale's family had to relive this all over again. And as a prosecutor, I can't look them in the eye and say the right person was punished because we don't know.
He was the fucking
That's
prosecutor.
the scariest aspect of this, and also very difficult
fucking
to
was him.
maintain faith in a system that prosecutors, you and I know how impactful and how much we can control certain aspects
That's so
of it.
fucking confusing.
And to know that you
Like
No.
if he's the prosecutor, right? Shouldn't he be the one that says, I don't want to take this case anymore, drop it?
Well,
Can
he was trying
prosecutors
to
not
get
do
it.
that?
He was trying to get it so he wouldn't be killed.
No, I understand, but you know what I mean? Like prosecutors have the choice to prosecute or not. So
I
could
don't know,
he just
bro.
go, I'm not prosecuting this case, drop the charges? Could that not be the conclusion? Or was it
No.
the judge that is like, nah, fuck this guy?
It's up to a judge whether the judge determines if the death penalty happens. Nobody else.
Okay, so it's the judge is the one who determines the sentence, but the prosecutor is the one who determines the guilt. Yes?
The prosecutor just presents the case.
Okay. But still, I still contest that the job of a prosecutor is not to get convictions. You can go fuck yourself if you're trying to convince me of that.
are fighting to understand the integrity of a conviction. And that's done.
We have to, our job, we have to recommend folks go to jail sometime. That's part of our job. But it's also part of our job to make certain there's safeguards to ensure that we get it right, even if that means 20 years later. And so even though this case predated
would
me,
there have been,
it was our office.
If he got released, would there have been remuneration, do you think? Do you think he would have gotten any remuneration for the time spent? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say they would have just let him out and he might have died anyway. Who fucking knows? You're right, because 24 years in prison, Life's pretty different outside.
This has still had an obligation to
And
do
they
everything
don't.
that
They
we could
nobody ever fucking
to make
talks about
certain that
this.
justice was served, and we fought, it's tough. It's tough.
It is very emotional to think about what happened at 7 p.m. tonight. Wesley Bell, thank you so much.
Those 5 men have run out of appeals. That means that they can be executed at any time now, and it could happen.
Okay, so this is South Carolina's execution. So I put this with it because I saw South Carolina's, and I was going to put this in the news segment for the news this month. But I might put this and Marcellus Williams in there as a bigger story.
As early as next month. Now, those who support the death penalty say it's a necessary punishment, and those who oppose it say it's cruel and ineffective. 5 death row inmates out of appeals and could possibly be the next executions in South Carolina. Richard Moore, Marion Bowman, Brad Sigmund, Michael Maddie, Stephen Bixby.
Take a look at the facts. Don't just, it's not some jealous husband who catches his wife, sleeping with the postman.
The first inmate who could be executed is Richard Moore, who's accused of killing convenience store clerk James Mahoney in 1997. His punishment, former solicitor and Senator Greg Embry says, should be applied in certain cases.
In recent history, I think that generally the death penalty has not been used very often. And the times that it's been used, at least the ones I know about, you can certainly understand the justification for that and pursuing it under those facts.
Governor McMaster, save Khalil!
On Friday, anti-death penalty groups rallied against the state's first execution since 2011 at Broad River Correctional. Freddie Owens was put to death by lethal injection that night. Executions were put on hold for more than a decade because the state ran out of the required drugs and couldn't restore the supply until lawmakers passed a shield law that would protect the identity of companies who supplied them. Lethal injection, firing squad, and electric chair are now the available methods.
Yes, I still believe that having an ultimate punishment is good for the criminal justice system.
Death penalty opponents, including the ACLU of South Carolina, say
there's an ultimate punishment. It's called life.
What the firing squad?
Yeah, because
is this North Korea? What the fuck is happening?
No, so I believe you and me looked this up before, but like they just said, they ran out of stuff to do the injections until they made it so the lab suppliers would be protected. So
but I would think that you would take firing squad off. No,
hang on. Let me finish speaking, please. They approved firing squad because they couldn't get the drugs for lethal injection. So after the firing squad was approved, they then did this SHIELD Act that allowed those drugs to happen again. So I don't think there's ever going to be a firing squad execution as long as the drugs are accessible.
Right, but it's there as a safeguard in case they run out again.
Yes.
Awesome. Great. I'm so glad America is such a forward-thinking country that it still has the death penalty. Pretty awesome.
Protestants.
Pretty cool. Eye for an eye and all, right?
So we can
start
killing the Protestants. This calls for an ineffective form of cruel and unusual punishment that not only fails to make us safer, but raises the possibility of the state killing innocent people in our name. Advocates and attorneys say new evidence in the Owens case should have led to that execution being halted. But even in the U.S. Supreme Court turned down that appeal. Right now, there is a system in place where executions could happen every 5 weeks in South Carolina.
If you want to stay up to date with this story and much more, subscribe to our Watch Fox YouTube page. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss an update.
And some developing news tonight. South Carolina has executed a man that the key witness for the prosecution claims was innocent. Now, his last chance to live was denied when South Carolina's governor refused to grant clemency for the 46-year-old named Freddie Owens. Owens was sentenced to death over the 1997 murder of a gas station clerk, Irene Graves, during an armed robbery. She was shot in the head. But emergency motions filed by his lawyer claimed the co-defendant in the case admitted that he lied at trial as part of a secret deal Despite this, South Carolina Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court rejected requests to stop that execution. Freddie Owens was killed by lethal injection. It was South Carolina's first execution in 13 years. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas joins us now. Danny, there were a bunch of appeals filed for Owens throughout the years. Why did it take so long to uncover this new evidence that might have proven that he was innocent?
Well, that new evidence came from his co-defendant. So I guess the real question would be, why now did the co-defendant decide to execute an affidavit? And being a criminal defense attorney, it may surprise some folks to learn that these kinds of affidavits of witnesses recanting are actually not all that uncommon. Or I should say, the mere fact that there was an affidavit saying he didn't do it, I didn't give truthful testimony at trial, it's not the first time that kind of thing has happened. It happens fairly, I wouldn't say often, but it does happen, and courts don't look at those.
And they still executed him.
Affidavits as automatic get out of jail cards, and they don't automatically vacate a conviction or even stay in execution necessarily based on an affidavit like that. Even though I have to concede, this affidavit is very compelling, even though it was obtained very shortly before the execution.
And the state Supreme Court, they still ruled that the appeal wasn't compelling enough to stop the execution. They wrote in its order that Owens still took part in the armed robbery and showed, quote, reckless disregard for human life. If
oh, you participated in a robbery, guess you die.
Evidence suggesting that he didn't actually commit the murder wasn't enough to stop the execution, could anything have stopped it?
So I think in that passage, what the court was doing is making the distinction between evidence that he was the shooter or evidence that he was present at the scene but conducting the robbery. There's tons of case law on this issue. You know, whether someone who doesn't actually pull the trigger, are they to be treated exactly the same as the guy who's there? And generally speaking, accomplice liability answers that question, yes. But there were many different, very complex appeals here. And the bottom line on that affidavit, which really was just obtained very recently, it's the kind of thing that isn't necessarily going to convince a court that an execution should be stayed. Although you can see that there are judges out there who might take a different tack. It's luck of the draw who you get. In related news, his petition to the Supreme Court, the U.S.
Like that string of words should not exist together. Your life depends on the luck of the draw of the judge that you get. That's a fucking joke.
Supreme Court, which is based on different grounds related to the means of execution. As I understand it, this just came down. One justice would have voted to hear more. The rest, apparently, the remainder did not.
Danny Savalas, thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about
the debate of the legality of the death penalty has also reached the High Court of South Carolina. Today, lawmakers discussing different methods and if any method is humane. The argument's taking up much of the day.
Well, Queen City News reporter Will Lewis joining us live here in the studio after hearing those arguments. So first, Will, explain to us, give us some context as to how we even got here.
Well, Alicia and Morgan, it all started back in May of 2021 when lawmakers changed the primary method of execution in South Carolina. Now, those drugs, because there was a lack of drugs for lethal injection, South Carolina lawmakers made of the electric chair the primary method of execution. Last year, a lower court in South Carolina ruled execution by firing squad or electrocution are cruel and unusual.
It's been questioned a long time in the state of South Carolina.
Why is South Carolina the only state in the country that wants to execute people and that is executing people that can't get the execution drugs?
Well, it's certainly a question, obviously, that this court has.
The answer for why the drugs can't be purchased may not be answered during these arguments, but attorneys for two men on death row maintain having to choose between death by electric chair or firing squad is unconstitutional, as a lower court ruled in 2022.
We can't do experiments on humans. We can't take a human being, strap them in a chair, shoot a couple thousand volts of electricity in them, and then give them a customer satisfaction survey and say, well, what'd you think about that?
More than 30 people are currently on death row in South Carolina, and executions have been delayed since 2017 because those in the corrections system have been unable to purchase the 3 drugs for lethal injection, which was the primary method.
So South Carolina, I love this logic, right? That they're like, ran out of death drugs. You know what we should do? Instead of getting rid of the death penalty, because when running out of something that isn't really necessary and is redundant, you remove it. Instead, they were like, guns. Shoot them. Shoot them instead. Very cool. Try not state-sanctioned murder. Pretty cool.
Until May of 2021, when lawmakers changed it to
just like slavery, murder is legal if you're the state.
Electrocution or firing squad.
The firing squad itself, when it comes to unusual, is a long-standing punishment that's been used in this country. The first one was in 1608 when George Kendall was executed for a mutiny in the colony of Jamestown.
Most recently, an execution by firing squad was carried.
Shouldn't the fact that the first one was 430 fucking years ago tell you that it's time to move the fuck on?
Now, in Utah in 2010, South Carolina.
Tradition.
Fucking idiots.
Supreme Court justices will need to determine if either method can be used, and executions in the state continue.
Now, some justices feel if there was a shield law in place for drug companies, this would not be an issue. But that's not up to them to pass legislation. Also, no word on when a decision from the South Carolina Supreme Court in this case will be made. Morgan.
Breaking news this morning, one person has died after a suspect hijacked a Metro bus at gunpoint overnight. Police pursued the bus for about an hour before it came to a stop in downtown LA.
Are you aware of a CIA psychological profile about you, sir? Would you be interested in hearing what the CIA had to say? This secret study portrays as a brilliant but dangerous megalomaniac who is likely to pursue his own aims in disregard of U.S. interests. He's an uncertain ally. Shall I go on, or would you prefer that I stop, sir?